Here's your engaging and suspenseful introduction. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the busy city street as Officer Daniels adjusted his radio and stepped out of his patrol car. It was supposed to be a routine day, just another call about a disturbance outside a convenience store, but nothing about what happened next would be routine. As he approached the store entrance, he spotted a young girl in a wheelchair, barely a teenager. She looked nervous, glancing around as if searching for someone. The store clerk stood by the door, arms crossed, clearly upset. She was messing around in here, the clerk huffed. Took some things and didn't pay. Daniel's training kicked in. He'd handled plenty of shoplifting cases before, but something about this situation didn't sit right. The girl's hands trembled slightly as she clutched the armrests of her wheelchair. Her wide, dark eyes darted between him and the clerk. "I didn't steal anything," she said, her voice firm but edged with fear. "I was just waiting for my mom." Daniels exhaled, keeping his expression neutral. He had a job to do, and whether she was telling the truth or not, he needed to follow protocol. "All right, let's talk outside," he said, gently gripping the handles of her wheelchair and rolling her toward his cruiser. The girl tensed. "You don't understand," she insisted. "I didn't do anything." Daniels ignored the growing knot in his stomach. He'd been a cop long enough to know when someone was hiding something, or when they were scared for reasons beyond the situation at hand. He reached for his radio. Dispatch, uneven name check on a juvenile suspect. Before he could finish his request, the girl blurted out, "Call my mom." Daniels sighed. "All right, what's her name?" The girl swallowed hard, staring him straight in the eye. "Chief Harris." Silence hung in the air for a moment, the weight of those two words settling over him like a thunderclap. He blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "What?" "My mom is Chief Harris," the girl repeated, her voice steady now. "You just detained the police chief's daughter." Daniel's grip on the radio slackened as his mind raced. Chief Harris, the most respected, no-nonsense leader in the department, the woman who had built her career on integrity and fairness, he had just put her daughter in cuffs. His heart pounded as he looked at the girl again, seeing her in an entirely new light. This was no ordinary stop. This was about to become a moment he would never forget. Daniel's breath hitched as he processed what the girl had just said. His mind raced, flipping through everything he knew about Chief Harris, her reputation, her leadership, the way she commanded respect. She wasn't the type to use her title to get out of trouble, and if this girl really was her daughter, it meant one thing. This was about to get complicated. The girl sat in her wheelchair, watching his reaction closely. She wasn't panicked anymore. If anything, she looked tired, like she had been through this before. That realization made his stomach twist. "Look," she said, crossing her arms, "I didn't take anything. I was just waiting outside for my mom, and the clerk started yelling at me. He thought I was loitering or something. Next thing I know, he's accusing me of stealing." Daniels turned toward the store, glancing at the clerk, who was still standing by the door, looking impatient. This was routine for him. Another call, another kid accused of shoplifting. But something about this didn't feel routine at all. He turned back to the girl. "What's your name?" he asked. "Nia," she said. "Nia Harris." Daniels exhaled slowly. He needed to think. He could call the chief right now, explain what happened, and let her deal with it. But that would mean admitting he had almost arrested her daughter without even questioning the situation properly. That would mean explaining why he had assumed the worst. He crouched down beside her, lowering his voice. "Nia, if you didn't take anything, why did the clerk call me?" Nia rolled her eyes, because people see what they want to see. Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had been a cop long enough to know that sometimes the truth wasn't as simple as it seemed. He glanced back at the store, debating his next move. If he let her go without checking, and she really had taken something, he'd be the one answering for it. But if she was telling the truth, then this wasn't just about a shoplifting call anymore. It was about something much bigger. Before he could say anything else, the crackle of his radio snapped him back to reality. Unit 24, Chief Harris is en route to your location. Daniels stiffened. The chief was already on her way. That meant she knew. Nia smirked slightly. Told you. Daniels swallowed hard. He wasn't sure what was coming next, but one thing was clear. This situation was far from over. Daniels sighed, reaching for his radio. Dispatch, I need to report a false accusation. But before he could finish, Nia held up a hand. Actually, never mind. Everyone stared. The store clerk let out a relieved breath. See, that's what I thought. Nia smirked. I just wanted you to feel what it's like, to be accused of something you didn't do. Silence. Daniels exhaled, the tension finally breaking. Harris gave her daughter a small nod of approval, and the store clerk, still red-faced and flustered, quickly retreated into his shop, mumbling under his breath. Daniels looked at Nia again. For the first time, he saw her not just as a kid in a tough situation, but as someone who had learned how to navigate a world that constantly tested her. You got me, he admitted, shaking his head. Nia shrugged. I just did what you would have done. Harris gave Daniels one last look. I hope next time you'll do better. Then, without another word, she turned, pushing Nia's wheelchair toward the car. Daniels stood there, watching them leave, feeling something shift deep inside him. He had spent years believing he was one of the good guys. But today, he realized being a good guy wasn't about what you believed. It was about what you did. And for the first time in his career, he wasn't sure if he had been on the right side of the law or just the easy one. Daniels stood there long after Chief Harris and Nia had driven away. The flashing lights from his patrol car reflected off the glass storefront, but for the first time, they didn't feel like a symbol of authority. They felt like a reminder of how easily things could have gone wrong, of how often they probably had without him even realizing it. He exhaled and turned back toward the store. The clerk was still inside, pretending to be busy rearranging items on a shelf. Daniels knew the man wasn't truly sorry. He was just embarrassed. But embarrassment didn't undo the damage. It didn't erase the fact that Nia had been treated like a suspect simply because she existed in a space where someone thought she didn't belong. Daniels tapped his radio. Dispatch, I'm clearing the scene. His own voice sounded different to him, less sure. As he got back into his car, he thought about what Harris had said, about doing better. It was easy to wear a badge, easy to say the right things. But was he really doing the work? Was he really seeing people for who they were, or just reacting to what he'd been trained to expect? The realization sat uncomfortably in his chest. He had spent years believing he was fair, objective. But maybe fairness wasn't just about following rules. Maybe it was about questioning them when they didn't make sense. He started the engine, but before pulling away, he grabbed his notepad from the dashboard. He flipped to a fresh page and, after a pause, wrote down 2 words. Asterisk, asterisk, be better, asterisk, asterisk. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. As he drove off, the night felt different. The Joel hadn't changed. The city hadn't changed. But maybe, just maybe he had. She's innocent, she won't mind showing us. A chill ran through Daniels. He had already stepped into dangerous territory, but now the situation was spiraling into something worse. Checking her bag without cause would be a step too far, a violation of trust, of respect, of the very things Chief Harris had built her career on. Daniels swallowed hard, looking at Nia. He didn't expect her to comply, but to his surprise, she slowly unzipped her bag and turned it over. A few personal items tumbled out, some books, a charger, a small notebook, nothing else. The silence that followed was deafening. Chief Harris took a step forward, her voice dangerously low. You just accused my daughter again. After everything you just saw, after everything we just discussed. And for what? Because it's easier to assume guilt than admit you were wrong. The clerk opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His face had gone pale, his confidence slipping away. Daniels felt his pulse hammering. He had spent years thinking he understood people, that his badge meant he was always on the right side of things. But now standing here, watching Nia gather her things with a quiet, practiced ease, like she had done this before, he realized how blind he had been. The radio on his shoulder crackled, but he barely heard it, because right now there was only one question running through his mind. Had he been doing his job all these years, or had he just been following a script? The world around Daniels felt eerily still. The weight of everything, the choices he had made, the assumptions that had led him here, settled heavily on his shoulders. He looked at Nia, then at Chief Harris. He expected anger, maybe even outrage, but what he saw in her face was worse: disappointment. Daniels turned back to the store clerk, who was now shifting uncomfortably, realizing the ground beneath him was crumbling. "You were wrong," Daniels said, his voice firm but quiet. "She didn't take anything. You had no reason to call this in." The man swallowed hard, his face turning red. I was just trying to protect my business." Harris let out a sharp breath. From what? A girl in a wheelchair waiting for her mother. The store clerk didn't answer. Nia picked up the last of her things, slinging her backpack onto her lap. There was no smugness, no satisfaction in her expression, just exhaustion. Daniels felt something twist inside him at the sight. He had seen this before, but he had never really seen it. The quiet resignation of someone who was used to being questioned, used to being doubted. Daniels turned back to Chief Harris, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "I messed up," he admitted. Harris studied him for a long moment. Then, with a slight shake of her head, she said, "Yes, you did." The finality of her words hit like a punch. He could have left it there. He could have stepped back, let them go, and spent the rest of his shift pretending this was just another call. But something inside him wouldn't let him. "Nia," he said, his voice careful, "has this happened before?" Nia hesitated. Then, for the first time, she really looked at him. "You already know the answer to that." Daniels exhaled. The truth sat between them, unspoken but undeniable. Then, just as the tension seemed to reach its breaking point, another voice cut through the silence. "Actually, I do want to press charges." Everyone turned. Nia tilted her head. "What?" Harris raised a brow. "For what?" Nia straightened in her chair, eyes locked on the store clerk. "For making a false report." The clerk's face drained of color. "Wait, hold on now." "You said I stole something," Nia continued. "You got the cops involved. You wasted their time. And now, when it turns out you were wrong, you just get to walk away." Daniels blinked. He hadn't seen that coming. Harris looked at her daughter, expression unreadable. Then slowly she nodded. "She has a point." The store clerk stammered. "This is ridiculous. I was just..." Making assumptions, Harris finished for him. Daniels straightened. "Did you see her take anything?" The man hesitated. "I mean, I saw her rolling around near the shelves. She was looking at stuff." Daniels narrowed his eyes. "That's not the same as stealing." The clerk scoffed. "Look, officer, I run a business. I can't have people hanging around making customers nervous." Nia exhaled sharply, gripping the wheels of her chair. "So that's what this is really about." Daniels looked between them, the tension thick in the air. He had walked into this thinking it was a simple situation, but now he saw the layers beneath it. Nia wasn't just another teenager accused of shoplifting. She was someone who had likely dealt with assumptions like this before, and now she was sitting there, waiting to see if he was going to be just another cop who treated her like a suspect first and a person second. Before he could respond, the sound of an approaching car made them all turn. A sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb, and the door swung open. Chief Harris stepped out. She was dressed in plain clothes, but there was no mistaking her authority. Even out of uniform, she carried herself like someone who commanded every room she entered. Her eyes locked onto Nia first, scanning her quickly to make sure she was okay. Then, her gaze shifted to Daniels. He straightened instinctively, forcing himself to hold her stare. He had worked under her long enough to know she didn't tolerate nonsense, and right now, he was standing in the middle of what could easily turn into a serious problem. Harris took a slow step forward. "What's going on here?" Daniels opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Nia beat him to it. "Same thing that always happens," she said. "Somebody saw me, assumed I was up to no good, and called the cops." Harris' jaw tightened, but her expression remained unreadable. She turned to Daniels. "And what did you do?" Daniels hesitated, suddenly aware of how every decision he had made in the last 10 minutes was now under a microscope. "I followed protocol," he said carefully. "I asked questions. I was in the process of figuring things out." "By detaining her?" Harris cut in, her tone sharp but controlled. Daniels felt a bead of sweat on his temple. "I was trying to assess the situation." Harris studied him for a long moment, and the silence stretched thick between them. Then she turned to the store clerk. "Did you actually see my daughter steal anything?" The man shifted uncomfortably. No, but..." "No," she repeated. The clerk cleared his throat. She was acting suspicious. The weight of her words sank deep into Daniel's chest. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, he saw the exhaustion in her eyes. Not just from this moment, but from a lifetime of moments just like it. Harris shifted her focus to the store clerk. "You called the police because you were uncomfortable, not because a crime was committed." The man bristled. "You were just assuming." Harris cut him off, her voice sharp. "And my officer backed up your assumption without proof." Daniels clenched his jaw. He wanted to defend himself, to say it wasn't that simple, but the truth was it was. He had reacted to a call, not to a crime. And now he was standing in front of his superior, realizing that maybe he had been part of a problem he never wanted to acknowledge. A tense silence stretched between them, and then Harris exhaled, shaking her head. "Take off the cuffs." Daniel's hands felt heavy as he reached down, unlocking the handcuffs from Nia's wrists. She didn't rub them or complain. She simply folded her hands in her lap, watching him with that same quiet, knowing look. The tension was at its peak now, everyone waiting for what would happen next. Harris had made her point clear, but Daniels knew this wasn't over. Not for Nia, not for him, and definitely not for the department. Whatever happened next would determine more than just how this moment ended. It would decide what kind of officer, what kind of person he really was. Daniels stepped back as the cuffs clicked open, his mind still spinning. The air was thick with tension, but something told him this wasn't over. Nia stayed quiet, her expression unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, something that told him she had expected all of this from the moment he approached her. That realization made his stomach twist. Chief Harris let out a slow breath, glancing at her daughter, then back at Daniels. "I'd say we're done here," she said, her tone sharp but controlled. Daniels nodded, unsure of what else to do. He wanted to say something, to explain himself, but what could he say? That he had made a mistake. That he was only doing what any officer would have done. Neither answer felt good enough.